Welcome to Dialing In Your Coffee Business, where we help cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. I'm Michael Ryan. I'm a certified business coach and consultant that helps cafe and roastery owners build a healthy and profitable coffee business that takes great care of all the people, including them. On today's episode, I'm joined by Maxwell Mooney. We recorded this episode before Maxwell took his job with Onyx Coffee Lab, and we talk about how to invest in your staff. We're taking a 30,000-foot view to overview what we call talent management. That is the recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, developing, and compensating of your staff members. This is not day-to-day management. This is the broad idea of how to manage the idea of having people in your business. We talk about the difference between viewing people as a liability versus an asset, viewing people as an expense versus an investment, and as Maxwell so rightly points out, how to always view people as that, people, humans inside your business with needs, desires, wants, dreams, hopes, goals, and expectations. And if we don't have clear and shared expectations, it always leads to conflict. This conversation comes from the trenches, especially on Maxwell's side of things, running and managing and selling Narrative Coffee. We know you'll find this helpful and useful, and I hope you enjoy. And now my conversation with Maxwell Mooney. Welcome back. We are talking about one of my favorite topics today, and that is talent management. Talent management is a catch-all term for how we find people to come work for us, how we interview them, how we get them on board, how do we think about compensating them, and how do we think about developing them? Those are kind of the five major buckets. On today's episode, I just want to do a 30,000-foot overview of this idea of it's not managing people. That's different. That's once people are in your business, once people are working for you, there's elements of taking great care of them and leading them well and being a good manager. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about the overall process of finding people to work for you, interviewing them, onboarding them in a way that sets clear expectations, compensating them in a way that's sustainable and fair, and ultimately developing them. And there's one big mindset shift that I think has been really helpful for me. And Max, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think a lot of times when we talk about the people in the business, we often think of them as expenses. And I really feel like it's much more helpful to think about the people in the business as investments. Even though I know that labor on a P&L, like labor is going to show up as an expense, right? But philosophically, like how we think about people, if we think about them as an expense instead of as an investment, it can potentially lead us down a path that's not very accurate, I don't think, but also not very helpful. And we talked about this during small group last week quite a bit, that it's a lot more helpful to think of people as a really great investment, not just an expense on the P&L. But I'm curious, Maxwell, I don't think you and I have talked about that too much. How does that sit with you to think about people as an investment versus an expense? What comes up for you when I offer that?
I in no way mean this in a negative way, but I try to think of people as people. Like I understand that there's some costs associated in that sort of a thing, and I'm not trying to like take some moral superior high ground or anything like that. But I always try to keep that in mind, of the fact that like the human beings are people. And within the scope of my business, of course, they do represent something. And I think an investment is a much better option than thinking of them as an expense. And I get it, right? I've paid out plenty of paychecks. I get it. Especially when you're cutting them and they're bigger than yours. It's like, a little painful. But, I still try to keep that in mind. Like people are people.
Yeah.
And how to make all of the like nuts and bolts around that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And viewing the investments into people as investments rather than expenses into people, I think is a very healthy, appropriate way to view it personally. I think a lot about Richard Branson was one time asked about like why Virgin like particularly on the space side of things, why they teach people so much and why they invest in them so much. And they're like, what if they like walk away? Like how much is it going to cost you if they walk away? And he said, well, how much is it going to cost if I don't invest into them?
Yeah.
Which I think is such a helpful thing to think about.
Yeah.
That it costs you something to not improve and help people grow. So anyway, people are they're almost always a worthwhile expenditure of dollars to invest in them.
Yeah. And I think, that's such a good distinction. I think I was specifically referring to the dollars that we spend related to people. And, whether or not those dollars are an expense or an investment. And totally. I find it a lot more helpful to think in terms of, training somebody, that's an investment, not only in that person, but also in our business. And I'm going to forget who said this, but your story about Richard Branson reminds me of a story I heard about an employee that made a mistake that cost the company tens of thousands of dollars. And the CEO was asked if they were going to let that employee go. And the CEO was like, no, I just spent tens of thousands of dollars training them, basically. Like, I'm not just going to fire them for making a single mistake. They learned a lot from that mistake. Another thing that the Richard Branson story makes me think of is when we don't invest in people, especially because the number one reason I hear for not investing in people is that they're going to leave anyway. And so why invest in them if they're going to leave anyway? But you could flip that around and think about, well, if we don't invest in them, how much worse is it going to be if they stay?
Yeah, exactly.
Because a person who sticks around but has not been developed or invested in, generally speaking, that's when they can become more of a liability than an asset, or more of an expense than an investment. And so it is really, it's kind of just a whole different paradigm to think about the human side of the business. And the reason this has come home to me recently, or it's been on my mind recently, which is why I wanted to chat about it with you today, is I hear a lot of folks say when we recommend or when I recommend getting a bookkeeper that really actually does what a bookkeeper is supposed to do. I don't know how else to say it. And people say like, oh, I can't afford that. That sounds expensive. Or I was just talking with one owner, and they've got multiple cafe locations and a roastery, and we were talking about that a good business manager would be a worthwhile investment, but they were stuck on how expensive that is. And I feel like that all stems from an underlying assumption, an underlying view that the labor dollars that are going out of the bank account are all expenses. They're just those are just getting flushed down the drain from a business standpoint. But I don't think of it that way. When I think of those dollars being an investment, one of the underlying kind of expectations is that, yes, we put this money out there and it comes back to us twofold, fivefold, tenfold, even sometimes. So thinking of those dollars as an investment takes us down a path where we look for, especially when we find great folks to work in the business, where we actually do look for a return on that investment. But this, I feel like, is kind of an unknown philosophy in the coffee industry at large, that people are an investment, which also means we should expect a return on that investment. How did you navigate with that, and navigate that with some of the hires that you did with Narrative? As far as like you said at the beginning, people are people. We try to remember that. And also, if we're thinking of them as an investment, we expect a return on that investment. Because I know you made some pretty strategic hires along the way, and I'm guessing there were some sort of expectations in terms of like a financial return on your investment.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's like when bringing people on, Like there's a certain level of responsibility that you have as a business owner to ensure that they're coming into a role with the framework that's necessary to help them achieve those expectations that you have for their work. So, having like good jobs figured out and like clearly communicating about what that looks like. And, maybe you have one person coming on to help you figure out what the roles look like and that sort of a thing. But, it's like generally a pretty good idea to help people understand what a role will look like within that. But generally, people, when they have the skills and things that need to do their job well, and you help continue to invest in them, that usually will yield rewards for you and your company as well. Particularly, I think around like the areas of barista competitions and those kinds of things. That's something that we always supported people in a lot. Even though there's no direct ROI on it, there's no like, it's not like if I send someone to barista competition, then I know that that's going to get me a new account. Like it doesn't work that way for a coffee shop.
Right.
But it does create a healthy culture, which attracts people and, and then it also helps people spend time focusing on the actual craft of the thing for a while. And so for me, like that was a really helpful investment. It also gets you connected with people, and networking is a huge benefit to your business, which I think people sometimes don't realize. So there are lots of different ways of thinking about investments, but generally speaking, I'm looking for people who can do the job that I hired them to do, will do that well, who will show up and be reliable. That's definitely an easier thing to talk about when we're talking about entry level roles versus like more manager level roles, right? Because sometimes manager level roles are, especially early on, like if you're starting a coffee business, you often are hiring a manager to help you finalize systems, and those kinds of things. So that can be a slightly different conversation, but I don't know if that helps.
I heard somebody say, and I'm guessing this won't directly translate to coffee companies, partially because oftentimes a cafe manager will be responsible for hiring for that particular cafe location. But I heard somebody say once that once you have a company that's around 20 to 25 people, the whole process of like finding folks, interviewing folks, onboarding folks, figuring out their compensation and developing them becomes essentially like a full-time job. When you guys were heading up narrative, did the managers at each cafe location, did they do all the recruiting, interviewing, onboarding type stuff, or did you have a slightly different centralized process? What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so it was kind of a split system. The final authority on all hiring was me. And so one of the particularities about laws in Washington are that certain duties preclude people from like being involved in the tip pool when they're working on the floor. And one of those things is the ability to hire and fire people. And since our managers worked more on the floor than they did administrative duty, it made sense for me to just retain that component because like it would stop our managers from being able to participate in that. And like, that's the majority of where their money is coming, or the majority of where their hours are going. So until we got to the point where folks were doing more admin than they were floor hours, then I was going to switch people over to like salary and add that to them, add that to their job title, But generally what we would do is each manager would take point on like fielding resumes, and then we would sit down together and review. We would review some resumes, talk through like, hey, this person seemed really great. This person seemed like, they might not be the best fit right now. And then we would schedule interviews together, and we would do those together. So I often would interview alongside my manager team.
When I think about this overall topic of talent management, for lack of a better phrase, there's 5 main components, and I'd kind of like to do a deep dive on each of these over the next couple episodes with you, Maxwell. But the 5 components that stand out to me are the recruiting process, the interviewing process, which you just mentioned, the actual onboarding, the compensating and the developing.
Mhm.
And the thing that I think is most pertinent for today's conversation is simply that there are, let's just say, 5 pieces to this. And in general, I meet cafe and roastery owners who are actively engaging in 1 and sometimes 2 of these pieces. And you and I talked recently about even just actively putting the word out there that you're hiring as like as a form of, to me, that would fall under the umbrella of recruiting. That's not recruiting like you're not a sports team or a college, but actively putting the word out there. Why do you guys do that? Or why did you guys do that? Because I meet a lot of coffee business owners who that's totally outside of the realm of their thought process. They haven't even ever considered putting the word out that they're hiring. What caused you to, like, because I've seen on Instagram, like, not just a post, but like the job description is posted. But how did you figure out that would be a helpful thing to do? What would you say to people who have never considered it, maybe, is the better question?
I would frame this under some of the same conversations that we've had on previous episodes around being a good business is about filling a need. And one of the things you have to do is to like find people who have that need. And offering someone a job is the same kind of thing. So if people don't know that there's a job posting or a job availability, then they can't take it. So it's that simple. Like, honestly, it's that easy to just say, like, hey, like, we're hiring. Now, of course, you can go the LinkedIn route or like go to the places where people are looking for work and that sort of a thing. My philosophy is that people who often are fans of our company, they understand why we do what we do. They're going to be more visionally aligned with the things that we're doing. And so there's going to be less legwork from that end of things to have to go through to be able to bring someone on board. So
that's good.
That's kind of my philosophy around it, is like the people who are already fans are going to likely be like more suited to be an employee here, I guess, is, a thing.
Yeah. That reminds me of a conversation I had with Cabell about hiring regulars.
Yep.
People who are already engaged, like visionally aligned, like you said, they're already plugged in.
Yep. Hiring regulars is the best.
Yeah. You don't have to explain to them what you're all about. They've regularly been giving you money because they understand what you're all about.
A regular that I hired now owns a narrative. So just saying.
That's awesome. The best recruiting on the planet is great customer service. Is great hospitality that gets people to become regulars.
And a great mission, vision, and values.
Yeah.
So
word. That's
people want to get on the plane.
I love that. That's awesome. We already talked a little bit about interviewing. Onboarding strikes me as one of the places. So I said a little bit ago, I talked with coffee business owners, cafe and roastery. They're doing 1, sometimes 2 of these things. The one thing I'm thinking of is interviewing. Sometimes that's it, though.
Yeah.
I've worked at places and I've worked with business owners where they did interviewing, and then I'm not going to say there was any onboarding. I'm going to say there was like an hour of register training, but the actual like onboarding in terms of like setting clear expectations, going over the job description together, making it clear what it is to work for the place, is so much more than training. Training is like a little teeny piece of what I mean by onboarding.
Yeah.
Onboarding is more like, I heard somebody say, imagine that person is having dinner with their family, their significant other, at the end of their first week with working with you. What do you hope they say? Now reverse engineer that first week so that that's what they say.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the first 90 days of their employee with you.
Yeah.
Kind of that same philosophy. Like, what do you hope they say at the end of 90 days? Now
Yeah.
reverse engineer that so that that's what they say.
First off, I really love what you just said, because really what that's doing is putting yourself in the perspective of a new employee. And in the same way that as good operators of businesses, we put ourselves in the perspective of a first-time guest, somebody who's never been to our space before.
Yeah.
We should take that exact same intention and mindset into what it's like to first work for the place.
Yeah.
You know, so like for me, that's a really big question, which is to, again, back to this thing that I say all the time, but the source of all conflict is unmet expectations. And so from my end of the spectrum is I'm trying to help clarify as many expectations on the front end as possible. So that way we have ideally no unclear expectations, and that they're all reasonable. So that way we can move forward together toward this thing that we're after. Because anytime there's conflict, it's a distraction from our overall mission and vision and values. So if we can just alleviate that on the front end, then we're in great shape. So, you know, it's like I'm looking at going over what it means to be an employee. Like, you know, we make everybody read our employee handbook and sign it. We try to communicate like, hey, this is like, it seems like it's boring legalese, but it's not. Like, this is the foundation of our relationship together here. Please read this. You know, and it's like, try to not make it a super dry, boring read either. So that way people actually want to read it. You know, and then you also get to inject some of your person in there, and like the personality of your business, and you know, like what voice you have, and all those kinds of things. And then you know, thinking about like, well, what if someone comes in here with no coffee training at all? How do I help teach them what they need to know in order to do this successfully? How do I make sure that they have the space to do that well? You know, all of those things. It's all part of the process.
Going kind of down the list, the next one that comes up is compensation. And I think a lot of cafe and roastery owners could be tempted to be like, yeah, I pay people, check. That's not really what I mean when I say compensation. And just as one example, because I actually want to unpack this in particular, well, I want to unpack all these on separate episodes, but when it comes to compensation, like you said, the source of all conflict is unmet expectations or unclear expectations, which is just a ground for unmet expectations. And I find with compensation, this is one of those spots. And so there's all the reasons that people are probably already aware of. Then there's more that I never hear people talk about. And one of them is just an unclear raise structure. Do people get raises here other than minimum wage going up? I understand. But just that conversation of, do we give raises here? If so, when and how much? How do they work? I remember once having a conversation with an owner, and I asked them, like, how do you give raises? Do you expect your employees to ask? And you want this environment of like, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, or good things come to those who ask. Like, you want to create that. Is that what you want? Or do you, if they asked, would that be a bad thing? Like, you would consider that some sort of entitlement. And the owner was like, I really appreciate the way you phrase that question. I'll have to get back to you. And they never did. And that, to me, is what I mean when I say compensation. I don't just mean, you know, they get a paycheck, but how is that structured? What are the expectations? Are those expectations made clear? What happens when a person goes above and beyond? Is there compensation for that? I feel like I read something on Narrative Site. This is a long time ago. But some people, and if this is me misremembering, that's okay. I have seen on some coffee business websites, where they actually post, like, on their website, like, here's what the base pay is, here's our raise structure. Did you guys ever do something like that? That's what's in my memory, but I couldn't remember.
We published that. I will say that the raise structure, it happened because I didn't make it clear, because I wasn't sure, when I first started, of like, I have no idea if this business is going to exist in 2 years. So I don't know if I can talk about raises yet. Like I have no clue. I haven't gotten the systems dialed down to where I'm even able to take a paycheck myself, so it's like, so all that to say is I totally empathize with people not having clarity around that particular topic. And that's one of those things that often is a growing pain with people unless they've effectively run a business before and they just are really sure. Like now, as a seasoned veteran of running a business, if I was going to start a coffee business, I would just build that in because I know what works and what doesn't, and that'd be fine. But if you're a brand new business owner, it's so scary and you're not really sure sometimes. So all that to say is I understand. That doesn't necessarily help us move forward. But yeah, I did publish that. I've always been, again, really big on communicating expectations clearly. It's like at the end of the day, I couldn't pay people as much as I wanted, and I still wasn't able to get things like health insurance done that I really wanted to do because it's just super expensive. And there's still that like every time you add a benefit, you're having to ask like, wow, how do I make this work? Like, how do I pay for this? And like, that's a real thing that happens. But trying to be as honest and clear about it as possible, and then building as much value for people outside of just how much their take home is a really important way of being able to at least provide value for people who work for you, even if you can't fully compensate them to the level that you'd like to, long term.
Yeah. And I love that perspective. And that's kind of where I'd love to land the conversation today. That's the fifth and final piece of this is developing. And when I think of developing people, I think of it as almost like a type of compensation that's outside of their paycheck. Yeah. When people come to work for us and they leave whenever, a year from now, 5 years from now, that they might be a better version of themselves, or a happier, more fulfilled version of themselves, maybe, or just a more knowledgeable version of themselves. That to me is what I think of when I think of developing. And like logistically, that can look so many different ways. But it's more of that philosophical bent towards like, these are people. Yeah. If we're investing in them, we're going to be developing them. Yeah. The crazy thing that strikes me is as fluffy and abstract as that sounds, this can be one of the most powerful, concrete investments of our time, effort, and energy possible. But it also, developing people often gets put in the category of like squishy, fluffy things that practical people don't do. Yeah. I don't feel like that's where it should be, though. I feel like there's a great book. Actually, it's a terrible book, but it's a great title. It's one of those books. I have a lot of these on my shelf that I finished reading them, and I'm like, don't read this book. But the title is the ROI of Human Capital. Good. Well, even the title is pretty goofy, but the book is actually really terrible. I don't recommend it at all. But the idea that developing people can be one of the best returns on our investment, and it's not just financial. To be clear, that's not what I mean. I mean, being surrounded by people who are learning, growing, developing, becoming better versions of themselves is, in my limited experience, is one of the most satisfying parts of working in a business. Being with people, I think it's part of why coaching and consulting is so fun and engaging for me, is because that's essentially what I end up doing the majority of the time, is helping develop, in this case, it's the owner, but because of the work that I do, I essentially get to surround myself with people who are learning and growing and becoming better versions of themselves. And that to me is part of why this is so fun. It's not fluffy. It's not a squishy abstract thing. It's a very concrete thing, or it can be, and we can unpack how that is in future episodes. For now, the hope of this episode was to give folks kind of an overarching framework. When you think about the people side of the business, big picture, beyond the day-to-day, there are these 5 main kind of stages of recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, compensating, and developing the people that you are working alongside, working with. and understanding that when you're doing all 5 of these things, it's like an engine firing on all cylinders. There's a lot more is going to be possible when all 5 of these things are happening to some extent. And it may be that your company is big enough that you actually need to consider hiring somebody who knows how to execute these things and making it part of their, maybe it's not their literal only job, but it's part of their job, especially if the business has gotten to the point where it's so big where you could not execute these 5 things on a consistent, regular basis. But I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper into each one of these things and give people practical, tactical recommendations on how to, recruit, interview, onboard, compensate, and develop the staff. And really going back to building a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. These are part of, these are the kind of the underpinnings that make that all possible, make it all work. So I'm excited to dive deeper.
Same.
All right, brother. I will talk to you soon. Until next time, take care.
See ya.
Thank you for joining me today for my discussion with Maxwell Mooney. Please check out the links in the show note captions to follow Maxwell Mooney on Instagram at Maxwell Threadbare. You can also check out the interview he did with Upflip that has millions of views. They interviewed him while he still owned Narrative. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube. That's a great zero-cost way to support this podcast. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please check out our online courses, our group coaching, and our one-on-one coaching. That's the absolute best way to support this podcast. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to invite, please leave those in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already following us on social media, we are at Threadbare Coffee Consulting on Instagram, and that's really the only platform we're active on. That's where I regularly post bite-sized thoughts on what it will take you, the owner, to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you. The content we post on Instagram overlaps with the podcast, but it's generally distinct from anything we cover on this podcast. If you haven't already visited our website, we have a myriad of free tools and trainings for coffee shop and coffee roastery owners. Everything from calculating your cost of goods sold for both a cafe and a roastery, which is completely different, pricing, which again for a cafe and roastery is completely different, managing labor percentage in a way that takes great care of people, etc., etc. All of those tools and trainings are available at our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And last but not least, thank you for your interest in building a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you.